Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational Next Economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
I am privileged to be here today with my friend and ally, Beth Rattner, the Executive Director of the Biomimicry Institute. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Kevin.
It really is a pleasure to have you. And for our listeners, I'm wondering if you could just start by sharing your story and what brought you to the Biomimicry Institute, anything along the journey that you think might be interesting to share.
Sure. Now that I think about it, I think you might be part of my story. You were my permaculture teacher. And that actually is true that you are part of that story. When I first bought a house, I was really interested in painting it. And I think I was like all first-time homeowners, and you just go crazy painting in an entire weekend. And I got so sick. And I remember talking about it the next day to a colleague of mine. I was working at HP at the time, who said, well, you need to learn about green building. That one sentence completely changed my life. I got the book Cradle to Cradle. I got the book Biomimicry. I learned about green building. I learned about permaculture, all in the course of that year, and frankly started to follow up on all of it. After leaving HP, I got to meet Bill McDonough and Michael Brungart literally at a conference right when I was leaving HP, and got invited to help write the sequel to Cradle, which is now known as The Upcycle. I was definitely just one of many contributors. I played a super small role, but it was a huge learning opportunity for me. But then I got tapped after that to become the executive director and to help kick off the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute.
Which you really co-founded that. I mean, that was...
it didn't exist before. That's right. Yeah. And we brought it into being because it was actually before the days of circular economy. Way back then, if you could remember, we really found that there was no single certification label that was looking at 26 different endpoints of everything from endocrine, toxicity to carcinogens, and how would we really start to remake everything if we could? And there had to be benchmarks. That was the whole principle behind it. And interestingly, it was because of my work at Cradle to Cradle that I got interested in biomimicry. I had so many companies who would say, I'd love to be Cradle to Cradle Platinum, which was the highest level you could be, but I can't get my supplier to move. I can't get my manufacturer to create a less toxic adhesive, which you're now dinging me for, right? So how am I going to get better if I can't get these participants to be part of the process? And then through biomimicry, I realized that so much of what we depend upon in the chemical materials world could actually be replaced by structure, which is how nature designs. Nature doesn't use, it has adhesives, but it uses them in a very different way. most of the things that we create could actually be accomplished structurally. So I'll leave it at there for now, but that was my path. It very much started with a personal experience that became a seeker kind of inquiry to learn as much as I could about the field, happening to be in the right place at the right time. And then it just kind of has led me, in these different places to support both companies, but also to help educate the next generation and to start entrepreneurs. I really feel like entrepreneurship is so important.
I'm definitely in accord with that. And it occurs to me that our listeners at Next Economy now, I'm sure some do, but it's likely that many have maybe never heard of biomimicry.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could maybe unpack that a little bit for us. And I think it was provocative and interesting to hear that nature can solve complex problems that we attack with chemistry through structure and pattern.
That's right.
Just wondering if you could just describe for us, what is biomimicry?
Sure. Well, so there's a bigger field called bio-inspired design. And it's known by a lot of names, especially if you travel internationally. There's biomimetics, bionics even, which I thought was something different because I grew up, bionic man was a very different thing. But the field of biomimicry is really the process of looking to nature to create more sustainable and hopefully more efficient and effective designs that we humans need. So the most ready example that I like to give is Velcro. The guy goes for a hike, a burr attaches to his dog's ear, he pulls it off. He looks at it under a microscope, he sees the little tiny hooks of a burr, and he thinks about how he could just do this all day long, attach, detach. Isn't there something that we could perhaps use that application for? That, then you get $1 billion, I think it's a $500 million industry a year is Velcro just from that one observation. But the application to rethinking everything, a very famous example is also the Shinkansen train in Japan, which reduced a sonic boom, went faster and operated at about 15% higher energy efficiency simply by changing the front nose of the train from a flat-ended bullet shape to a kingfisher shaped beak. By looking at that exact geometry, they were able to change all of the fluid dynamics in front of it.
And so by looking at how nature solves problems or addresses needs, we can, and through forms and patterns and structures and processes, we can learn from that and take those processes to inform how we meet our needs.
That's exactly right. This is well said.
Yeah. And so what about the Institute? So here's this field of biomimicry nested in the field of bio-inspired design. What is happening? What's the Institute's role?
Sure. Well, yeah, let me go back. So Janine Benyus is really the person who coined the term. Janine wrote the book called Biomimicry, Inspired by Nature, back in 1997. It was published. And shortly thereafter, she and her a partner, Dana Baumeister, created a private consultancy called, at the time, Biomimicry Guild. And that was to specifically advise companies on how they could bring biomimetic design into their work. Shortly thereafter that, a woman named Bryony Schwan started the Institute with the idea that, wait a minute, this is such a powerful idea. How are we going to get kids who are learning traditional practices in design, engineering, architecture, et cetera, how are we going to get them to start pivoting to create what you would call the new economy? It has to start young. And so the Institute was really founded with this idea of being an education nonprofit.
Got it. And so the both for youth, young adults, and for early stage maybe entrepreneurs, that there's a whole range of people who we all do design at some level, and so there's opportunities to influence how we think about design at many intersecting points. So what are some of the, I'm curious, maybe just walk us through some of the activities of the Institute now. What does it look like now?
Sure. So programmatically, we focus on education and entrepreneurship. That's the main focus. And it really comes down to giving people three things. It comes down to access, meaning access to learning biomimicry. We want everybody everywhere to know that that there are free resources for learning this. It is a lens, and you do have to learn it. So it shouldn't be there are great schools like Harvard Wyss Institute in engineering that offers this, or University of Akron, Ohio, and MIT has a program in it now. But you shouldn't have to just be able to go to a handful of schools to get this education. Everybody should have it. So that's access. Practice is the idea that just like yoga, you have to practice it. You're not going to be an instantly great biomimic just the first time you learn about it conceptually. You have to apply it. And for that, we have our design challenge. And for access, we have Ask Nature. AskNature.org is a place where you can literally go in and type in a specific request, like how does nature adhere or filter, any kind of verb you could think of, attach. And you're going to get a list of biological organisms that do just that. You're also going to get a list of companies that are doing biomimicry and see some of those inspired ideas. So that's access. And then for practice, we have a design challenge. We have it for youth, beginning with middle school and high school. It's called our Youth Design Challenge. And then we have a Biomimicry Global Design Challenge, which is open to university students and also to entrepreneurs. And then the entrepreneurs that graduate from that design, it's not a formal program in that way, but just who complete that can apply to be part of our Launchpad. Okay. Which is actually, and then the Launchpad winners get the $100,000 Ray of Hope prize, which is sponsored by the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, the founder of Interface Carpet.
And so the Global Challenge, are there particular themes, or is it just biomimicry in general? Or
It's a great question. It used to be biomimicry. And I think when it first started, it was a student design challenge, and it was just, what can you do in the field of biomimicry? And then it became thematic around water, transportation, and then food systems. We have focused, ever since the Ray of Hope Prize became part of it, we're focused on climate and global warming solutions specifically. But the application could be for ag and land use. It could be for water. It could be for energy. So, but anything that gets us toward a collective solution, that's really what we want to do. There are fascinating biomimicry products in the field of medical sciences specifically. The work of Jeff Karp comes to mind out of Harvard. What he's doing with like surgical sutures and stem cells is so fantastic and advanced. I'd love to talk about that too. But that's super needed, but not the focus of our challenge.
So when listeners think about their work and their role as investors or entrepreneurs, or maybe they're MBA students, the field of biomimicry is something that can inform pretty much all of the aspects of the economy and our lives, I guess. And what are some of the things that you're tracking now that are grabbing your attention that maybe people don't know about, or you think are stories that could really influence the trajectory of the next economy? I'm curious what's on your radar.
Well, and this you'll appreciate, I think, and hopefully resonate with, is when you look at Drawdown and you look at the top 80 categories, and you look at like the top 25, I think 15 are related to land use specifically. There are biomimetic approaches to accelerating those exact land use solutions, or looking at wind specifically, of going from 4% to 22%, just roughly, right? In this time frame, there are technologies like whale power, which looks at how a humpback whale has tubercles at the end of its leading fin, and that design allows for about 32% reduction in drag. So now all of a sudden you have a more efficient wind turbine. John DeBerry out of Caltech, now he's at Stanford, but he created a project called Flow, where he took vertical wind turbines and aggregated them in the same design as a school of fish. And by having that vortice that a fish tail throws off, so that the next fishy behind him can swim with less effort, just by grouping the wind turbines into that same pattern, he was able to get anywhere between 5 and 10x output. So you can apply biomimicry to accelerating drawdown solutions, which is exactly what we need right now. It's like we were talking about with the IPCC report, knowing that there is a time horizon that we have to act. So we need to find those technologies, and it's so great to have a roadmap like Drawdown, right? So now you know exactly where to focus. And I feel like biomimicry is a perfect complement for having us now. So let's improve on those. So another example would be for land use, reforestation, such huge implications, but one of the reasons reforestation fails is because like the people that go up to climb and plant those little trees back up there, it requires a lot of maintenance, both in terms of watering, nutrients, making sure that the leaf cutter ants don't get them if we're talking about Brazil specifically. So we have a team that created a remotely deployable solution, like literally you can drop it in. And it looks, if you can imagine an old slide, the slide cartridge projector, the rounded projector, it looks kind of like that, but it's made of biodegradable materials. The little sapling exists in the center of it. And the design is those chambers, instead of holding old slides, actually contains, is a way to catch water. It's a way to catch leaves so that now you have a natural resource for feeding that sapling. You've got a system that mimics how nature would plant, which would be this sort of, what's it called? Like the nurse plant concept from permaculture. So those are the kind of solutions that I get really excited about, because so now that we know that, we've got to go for reforestation or afforestation. So what are we going to do? Well, let's look at nature, how nature does it. And then there are specific teams within our design challenge that are going after those kind of solutions.
It's really exciting. And it strikes me as one of the key leverage points when we look at the drawdown solutions, especially in the land use kind of category. We find that whereas the practices and their potential impacts are well described in the academic or scientific literature, the investment of resources into adoption of those practices the returns, I should say, don't necessarily conform well with the return expectations that are normal for capital and the mandates of capital or the liquidity or time frame. And so it's not necessarily, for example, that we need to innovate on how to take carbon out of the atmosphere per se. I mean, there might be very interesting ways to do that as well, but trees, photosynthesis are pretty darn effective and well proven. But the innovation could be on how do we establish trees?
That's right.
How do we protect them? How do we, and that form factor type of innovation, I think the opportunity of biomimicry and why I'm so jazzed on the existence of the Institute is that when I look around, I'm here in San Francisco, and I look around Silicon Valley, I see a lot of engineering talent and genius.
For sure. But
that genius is largely not in alignment with kind of the problems of our time. Maybe tangentially and not necessarily orthogonal to, but the Biomimicry Institute can maybe capture the attention of that genius and inform it. So I'm just super excited that you're doing this work.
That's exactly the hope, Kevin. I love the way you just said that, because humans are problem solvers. Like we have these minds that just don't stop, and we should focus them on something that could be. So here's an interesting, just to finish the sentence, we should focus them on creating solutions that are already tested by nature, even though the design is, of course, different than how humans are going to be able to design for material science reasons, for all sorts of practical reasons. But what's interesting about biomimicry is, have you heard of the NASA technology readiness level indicator? So you can go from like 0 to 9. If you're at 0, you're just having like, okay, I've got a problem, I've got to solve it. If you're at 9, you're ready to launch or you're ready to commercialize. Biomimicry gets you started at a 3 or a 4, because that design is already tested. It's tested in a different environment, but we know that this design works. And so just to give you an example, sharklet is one of my favorite stories. And what you have with sharklet is this idea of looking to the dermal denticles of a shark to repel bacteria. That pattern of a shark is really quite complicated. It's a series of troughs and ridges that prevent the bacteria from actually adhering to it, so that a slow basking shark doesn't actually ever get like the barnacles on it the way that a whale might. If you apply that to a nanofilm, you've got an antibacterial surface that can be used in hospitals, that could be used in offices. Steelcase uses it on the arms of their chairs, for instance. That, or again, if you think about hospital use specifically, where superbugs are so rampant, now you've got something where you don't have to use a whole bunch of Clorox and ammonia and bleach, which also has health implications, but you can actually use a structural answer to solve a very real social and, in this case, health problem. That's what I'm talking about there, is the process of looking to an existing design that we know works, Now we've got to be smart enough to create a similar analog in our own material palette. But just knowing that you could start there, like, oh, this design will repel bacteria, like that's a big deal.
Really big deal. And I can't imagine. Well, I don't want to be too cynical, but we need to get the word out biomimicry much further, because everybody has a role to play, and the exciting opportunity to align our technical genius with the axiomatic patterns of nature to create healthy, non-toxic environments. Even in the example you just provided, the cascading health implications to furnishings that don't carry viruses or bacteria, and people getting sick and flu, and just the cascading savings, financial and health concerns for humanity, for families all over the world. I mean, just the huge implications.
You know who asked us about that in particular was a prominent car company that's looking at autonomous vehicles, because in the world of autonomous vehicles, you pretty much don't own your car. Like, it's not just your family in your car anymore. So it's probably going to be more like an Uber situation where they get deployed all over. So now bacterial surfaces is a much bigger deal because you're sharing it with so many other people. Yeah. So like all these, I hadn't even thought about that, but of course it's a very real implication.
So thinking about biomimicry and the long tail implications for humanity, if we do align our technology, get super efficient and create healthy environments, reduce the toxic load in our environment and in our social systems, what are some of the challenges to getting there, or what are some of the opportunities that you're tracking to accomplish this task of making biomimicry normalized? That's just how design is. How do we get there?
I love that. That's the goal, is to, Janine says it, how do we make it a normal part of everyday inventing? So normalize is the right word. Part of it is the reason that we have a design challenge at all is we want people to be able to practice it in their local ecosystem, their local biome. That's where the genius exists. And so the very first thing is we want people to know that your answers are probably right outside your window. That's a crazy, empowering concept in and of itself. That I think about a team, one of the early teams out of a university out of Mexico that was really interested in water capture, and because obviously water is going to be it follows that same hockey stick curve of consumption rates as population grows. But this team looked at a local bromeliad plant, and a good example of a bromeliad plant, we all have them often in our homes, but it looks like the top of a pineapple. So they were able to take old fishing poles. So this is a great example. The structure of the top of a bromeliad works to capture water. It's proven. They see it every morning as the dew captures and the water collects inside the leaves. So they know that structure works. So how are they going to apply it? Essentially, what they did is they took old fishing poles and constructed, imagine like an upside down teepee, and that passive attachment of water, and then the droplets as the differential in temperature allowed for condensation to happen, it just traveled along those fishing poles and then would collect in the bottom of a basin. Now they have a very passive way to collect water locally. Ultimately, solutions are going to have to be deployed locally, and you're going to have to know what works in your specific environment for capturing water. I live right outside the redwood forest. I know that my solution is probably something that looks a lot more like that as opposed to what's happening with the Hetch Hetchy Dam, right? So it's about being in tune with what our environment is. And that's like, if there's a Trojan horse to biomimicry, it's that we don't have a conservation agenda overtly, but for sure it is part of it. And when you get outside and you start really studying that redwood tree, you're going to fall in love with that redwood tree. You're just going to, all of a sudden, you're going to appreciate just how astonishing the different mechanisms are. I mean, if in Hong Kong, when you try to pump water over 100 feet for any sort of high-rise building, I think it's like a 75% loss of energy that happens. There is no loss of energy for that redwood tree, and it's a dual migration of water system. We can become so much more intelligent of designing our own built environments by looking at the tree. But like I said, in the same time, we're probably going to stop wanting to log redwood trees because we're going to be so in awe of them, or at least log them hopefully more mindfully. So I think that's the part that's really important to me, is that we reconnect to, and it's not just something as grand as a redwood tree. It could be something quite small, like a butterfly or a moth, that, people equally fall in love with. And then all of a sudden that becomes what they care about.
I like that, because some of the conservation ethic that I've observed and witnessed actually sometimes comes tragically from a place of guilt and shame. It's like humans have destroyed so much and done so much hurt and harm and continue to do so. And there's this beautiful intention to say, stop, no, but kind of subversively underlying that is this feeling of guilt. And it kind of somehow kind of carries through in the tenor of conservation, which I think turns some other people off. And so this idea of reverence and learning, falling in love with the life around us, and developing a conservation ethic rooted in just curiosity. And it's so much, I mean, maybe I'm projecting, but it seems so much more communicable, so much more easy to share.
It's contagious. It's way contagious. Guilt is not contagious. My mother has tried for a long time, but it's not contagious. And you know what is when you say, come with me out to the forest and let me show you this astonishing creature. And is it Edward Abbey who said, we protect what we love? So I think that's we talk about biomimicry, and certainly with the Institute's programs, we're talking about new economy, next generation, regenerative, all of those important words that will go to how are we going to allow our species to survive, but hopefully so many others. But there's this other component, which is so alive for people, which is especially kids. So we see this in middle school kids. They are looking for a reason to get outside. And now all of a sudden their engineering class is letting them do it. Oh my God, this is their new favorite class. And we see adoption in girls specifically pursuing engineering related careers because the gateway has been biology. That's a very different place. So now all of a sudden we have 50% of the people who participate in our design challenge are girls or women, which is astonishingly high for a science-centered competition. And I think it's because that it's that curiosity you talked about. It's that love of nature.
I could easily imagine that being core to the reasoning. I think it's also really interesting and exciting to me. Something that I admire a lot is kind of the lineage you just described in the biomimicry our organizations, Janine and
Dana and Bryony.
Yeah. It's
all women.
Feminine-led kind of effort, which I think is really exciting. And the cutting edge of innovation in science and design is all women. That's super exciting to me in terms of leadership.
Well, thank you. It's such an honor. Actually, I don't think it was ever intentional, but it certainly has worked out that way. And I'll tell you something else too. That's part of it is there's always this natural, because so much of our work is academically based. So we do rely upon academic papers oftentimes as much as we rely on individual observation. But your individual observation is probably going to be enhanced by, let's say, an academic paper. And so we really want the two to go hand in hand. You can't rely on just one versus the other typically. And so it is interesting how we have some academic critics sometimes who say you can't mix love and academia. and some part of me suspects that there's a gender bias there, but I don't know if that's true or not. But for sure, the language of love is uncomfortable to some academics. But I also know from just talking to so many people literally around the world that is what motivates them.
Well put. And you just named something that I never really grappled with until now. There's something about when I'm reading lots of scientific literature, it just is totally devoid of aesthetic. And it's just... And biomimicry is an incredible bridge where some of the observational intention could be looking at something that's beautiful or eye-catching or interesting.
That's right.
So it's this bridge between an analytical assessment and rigor and what's beautiful.
And it's so much how we're driven, right? It's so much how we as humans are oriented toward beauty. And to deny that feels like you're going to be missing a really big part of the solution.
Indeed. So I think was it last year or the year before? Maybe it's the last couple of years. I know I saw you on the main stage at the Bioneers Conference talking about the prize for I think it's the global competition, not the youth.
That's right. It's for the Biomimicry Global Design Challenge and the Ray of Hope Prize.
The Ray of Hope Prize. And so here we are coming into fall. Is there a current challenge that's going to be coming to a moment of celebration and inclusion and pride?
There is. So we'll be on the Bioneer stage again. Jay Harmon, a fantastic biomimic in his own right, a guy who created PEX. He and his wife created PEX Scientific. And really briefly about PEX, it's another great example of how structure changes the solution. So Jay Harmon himself noticed as a young kid back when in Australia where he's from that the spiral pattern that was ever present in everything from how kelp, the giant kelp were formed to sunflowers to seashells, etc., and that there was an important principle of fluid dynamics that was happening with those spirals. He applied that to a fan, and the PEX fan or the Lily impeller that can move. That impeller can move. I think it's 7 million gallons of water on 300 watts of energy in the course of 1 hour. So it can destratify. So again, same thing, like you don't need bleach, you don't need chlorine because you're now using a motion to destratify and keep that water moving. That's an important, and then the same thing is now applied to fans that move air and circulation. And in fact, I reached out to Francesca, Jay's wife, when the fires were here because I asked if I could, because so much of containing a fire is about the wind, right? The wind can devastate fire efforts really quickly. With these fans, you can actually control and move tremendous amounts of wind with very low amounts of energy. So I asked her, and she said, it's funny you should ask because they were just people from British Columbia were reaching out to them about that exact question. So they're phenomenal, and they're going to be introducing the next round of prize winner of this current cohort. And then we always have essentially a new cohort going. So we just completed a boot camp in Montana for what will be next year's prize winner. So it's an ongoing process, and these really are international teams. We'll have teams from Latin America, from Europe, from the Middle East, from the United States. I'm really proud of the reach that we have.
Wonderful. I'm excited to see the new cohort that's reaching completion here, and just to track the ongoing effort. I'm curious, there are some listeners who are new to biomimicry, and they've kind of heard now about Ask Nature and the competitions and the Institute. What would you say? And some of them are, some of our listeners are philanthropists and looking to support organizations. What's the best way for somebody to plug in and get involved?
Sure. Well, there's a couple ways. I mean, our website has a series of stories. In particular, it has the stories from the Youth Design Challenge. We have a great gallery. If you want to just smile, oh my gosh, go check out these kids. One of our winning teams from the Youth Design Challenge, the middle school kids, they call it the superpower of the Saharan silver ant. And I love that. Like whoever the teacher was in that class, she did a great job because all kids want to know the superpower of any given creature. And they created a really beautiful solar tile that looks exactly like the back of a Saharan silver ant and how it's reflective both for disseminating heat, but also accurately collecting it. So we have those galleries where you can watch videos of those kids' teams. And I think that's the great way to get started. And it's also true for the entrepreneur teams and the more progressed. And so in terms of, and then of course there's always ways to donate through that site, because our goal is to reach more kids, and to reach more universities and to reach more entrepreneurs internationally. And so when we can, I always think about that those thermometers you pass of any school fundraiser. I would love to show one that shows where we're trying to, how much penetration we have in terms of reaching STEM related courses, because with STEM and next generation science standards, there is a window of opportunity for biomimicry that has never existed before, because next generation science standards looks at phenomena, and nature isn't innately a phenomena based learning technique. And also environmental education. As you know, in California, there's so much progress has been made by groups like 10 Strands, for instance, here in the Bay Area. If you look at just the population for California and Texas, and we could get biomimicry into these two states, we would have 25% of the kids in the United States. So that when we think about, and then in 10 years when those kids have graduated, that's a next generation who's empowered with a new set of tools that simply doesn't exist right now. And if we're talking about a 12-year time horizon for really correcting, well, we have to reach the companies that are currently in practice, but we also better create the next generation to be both around, to be proficient around mitigation strategies, but also adaptation strategies. Like it or not, our world's changing, and nature is a really good mentor for showing adaptation strategies. And I feel like if new inventors had this lens in place, and that's really what we're trying to raise money for, is to get as many people as possible thinking this way, then I feel like it's a hopeful agenda. I don't think we have to despair because, again, the models exist. We've never been shown how to read those models. It's like a set of blueprints, but nobody knows how to read them. But now if we can change that, I honestly think that we'd be in good shape.
What a wonderful space to put your energy into, just seeing what's possible on a day-to-day or regular basis, even in the context of all the hurt in the world and the legitimate fear and
for sure
what's going on. There's just so much possibility.
Actually, can I add to that? Yeah. We get the question a lot around social justice. It's such an important question. But one of the things that I'm hopeful about also is that environmental justice, if done well, is social justice. If we can get rid of the concept of polluted water, if we get rid of the concept of polluted air and all of the health, the cascade of health implications that you talked about before, if we can change the playing field of all of that through this better lens of innovating everything, redesigning everything, my hope is that at least it starts to level the playing field so that the have and have-nots don't come from really terrible different vantage points. And if that is a better place for a conversation, when every kid has access to food security, and again, healthy food, water, and soil. So that I feel like we can only all do so much. But for me, I'm hopeful that it does address both issues.
And there's definitely relationships throughout, adaptation and our harm reduction and our benefit to the biodiversity of the world and life. Those things can be tied together: environmental justice, social justice, environmental health. These things, there's a lot of intersectionality in this work, I think. I'm curious. I don't want to project my own. I'm curious. Here's a provocation that I'm just curious if it comes up in the biomimicry circles, again, with being so proximal to Silicon Valley and with so much enthusiasm around automation, robotics, AI, which seemingly is very similar. The thing that I love about biomimicry is how it shows up in the applications. A lot of it seems to show up in augmentation tools, making humans in our relationship to nature more ease, more healthy, more beneficial to life, not necessarily replacing human energy or endeavor, maybe some automation, but and yet there's so many brilliant people really close by who are just focused on, seems to be focused on kind of taking humans out of the material culture and dealing with material, and rather than augmenting, actually replacing or automating. And AI, both specific AI and general AI, are kind of I think some of the pinnacle expressions of removing our human brain faculty, I guess, or at least, I can't tell if maybe there's probably a tremendous amount of nuance in there, and I'm oversimplifying. But I'm curious if in the biomimicry circles people are talking about that, or if it comes up.
It does. I'm such a Luddite. I struggle with it, but I'll tell you that I found the silver line for me personally. I found the way to really appreciate AI, which is going back to this idea that we want people to get outside and do deep observation themselves. But at the same time, we know that, number one, you don't always understand what you see. Someone who's been studying the redwood tree for 20, 30 years probably has a different appreciation, and they can share something with you. So what we're using AI for, and we just completed a pilot with IBM and their Watson group around, is imagine if you could type into Ask Nature, how does nature move water, pump water, for instance, and all of a sudden the redwood tree comes up, but you could have access to the multiple papers that have already been written about the redwood tree pumping water. So it takes our researchers about 8 hours to construct a single strategy page, but it's something that could, not yet, but soon could be done in minutes, if not seconds. It's really sort of this advanced way of searching and culling all of the right information to serve that specific taxonomy that we're using for engineering and design terms. So in that regard, I feel it's like it's a good marriage, because you still need a human to go out and study that tree for 30 years. It doesn't replace that person or the person who wrote the paper, but now it gives the person who's inventing and doesn't have, frankly, a lot of time. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they're not even a biologist. Maybe you're an engineer, a water engineer who just has never thought about the redwood tree.
Right.
Wouldn't it be great if they could have access to all of that information? So that's the intersection that I'm actually pretty excited about.
It's a great example. Yeah. And gives everybody a role to play.
It does, right?
Yeah. And supporting a more biomimetic humanity. Well, I'm curious if there's any other things that you'd love listeners of Next Economy Now to know about the Institute, about biomimicry, about your work, or things that you're tracking, things that you're excited about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think two things. One would be that there is, this really is a practice that is growing. I'm so honored to be even a small part of it. I love that we're democratic, if you will, that we're providing this open access platform that feels different to me. That feels important. That isn't necessarily being done everywhere. There is a team, and then that leads me, so that concept of that, I want if I could ask everyone to try something, I would love for you today as a listener to go outside and just sit in front of anything, whether it's that pine cone or it's, in my case, it's a pine cone, but in your case, it could be a beetle, and draw it. Just draw, because that process of drawing, especially for those of us who can't draw, it's really frustrating, but it forces you to look deeply at anything. And you have to do it for 20 minutes. You can't just do it for 5. You have to do it for 20 minutes. And I'm telling you, something will happen. You'll for sure get frustrated, and you for sure will want to stop doing it. But I would ask you to keep going, because something will happen by the end of those 20 minutes, which is you will begin to fall in love with that thing, and you will see something you've never seen before. And that opens up something inside of us that I feel is so desperately missing from our really fast-paced, cell phone-driven life. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, I'm really proud of this path of entrepreneurship. I feel, as you know so well from working with companies for many years, it's always amazing to me how you bring, big companies will call you in and they'll say, we want to be innovative and disruptive. And for sure they do. But invariably there is something that happens, I think it's fear driven, which says maybe we should just acquire another company that's already out there doing it. It seems to be that an acquisition strategy is a more expedient path, which is fine. But what that points to is we need more entrepreneurs. We need more disruptors, because the big companies probably can't get there fast enough. The smaller companies can be very agile. They can be very locale specific in terms of the solutions that they provide. And so I think the second thing, if I would urge, would be, form teams, if you can, enter our design challenge, be part of it as a mentor. If you don't want to invent, come be part of it as a mentor. We need business mentors just as much as we need biology mentors. And that's true, by the way, across the board. And I feel like if we can spur that level of just massive amounts of innovation, that will be the path that will be able to have not just resilience, because I like the word resilience, but I also feel like it's very shielding. We're resilient to this outside invader. I like the word cooperation. I like the word collaboration. We can be in this really deep collaboration with each other just by being able to have more, generative businesses that start at the local level. And all of a sudden we're going to find ourselves, in permaculture, we're going to find ourselves with almost these little local economies that are innately more cooperative.
More cooperative, likely more equitable.
Yes.
More participatory, and creating benefit for life. It's very virtuous, and I see it happening. And
yay!
this is a great call to action. Both those provocations are very beautiful and important and timely. Well, Beth, I'm super grateful for you taking time to share, and I'm sure we could continue talking. Maybe we can find another time to revisit some of the great examples that are coming out through the design competitions and all the great work you're doing. I loved revisiting the thread of your story. You're on that cutting edge of hope, which I love that you're out there doing that work. So thank you so much.
I appreciate. Well, you are the same, Kevin, for me. So I feel like you are such a mentor for me, and I really deeply appreciate this time together and what you're doing in the movement.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to staying in touch, and I'll see you at Pioneers.
See you at Pioneers.
That concludes this episode of Next Economy Now, and now on to our mini interview with Doug Bistry, CEO of Clearinghouse CDFI.
Okay, welcome, Doug, to this interview series, the Next Economy Now podcast. And for listeners, I think one of the reasons I'm excited about Clearinghouse CDFI is that you're a lot different than other financial institutions. For Clearinghouse in particular, one of the most interesting things to me is that you're one of the only CDFIs or banks that I know that specifically serves sovereign nations. Can you speak a little bit about why you've chose to do loans in Indian country and a little bit of the backstory about that?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a really interesting story. I attended a board meeting on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation a number of years ago. And just by happenstance, there happened to be a very small business that was just getting started there, Native American Natural Foods. They're the makers of the Tonka bar, which is a buffalo and cranberry health food bar. It's the healthiest health bar on the market, in my opinion. And, I was fortunate enough to meet them on the reservation and sample their product. And I simply just thought it was a fantastic product. I love the idea. I actually love the taste of it and the fact that it's healthy. So, I simply said, hey, good luck. I think I exchanged cards with the principals at the time and just kind of forgot about it. And probably 6 months to a year later, I got a call from Mark Tilson, who is one of the principals of Native American Natural Foods. And he basically said, hey, Doug, I met you when you were out here and you were kind enough to, give us some words of encouragement. And I know you're a CDFI, and I'm looking for a CDFI in the Midwest that can help us with a loan because we, are getting a lot of orders and we can't fill them, and our business is growing, and it's all good. And I said, Mark, sure. I said, I know a lot of CDFIs in the Midwest. I know a lot of folks out there. Let me get on the phone. I'll find you someone. And as sometime what happens in life, I talked to a lot of people, and I kind of had a lot of people say, let me think about it, or we're not doing that, or let me get back to you, or this sounds really complicated. And bottom line is ultimately, I couldn't find anyone to step up and make the loan. And so I, at the time, my service area was just in California, but I simply went to my board and I said, look, we're a CDFI. This is a small business that really needs our help. They have tremendous obstacles to obtaining credit and even running a business. And if you've ever been to Pine Ridge, you understand some of the other difficulties in the environment there. And so I simply said to my board, we just need to make this loan. I know it's outside of our area. I know it's not the type of deal we do. And fortunately, I was able to convince my board to not only make a loan, but we made an equity investment. And then I started to think about that experience, and I started talking to some of the other leaders in Indian country, and basically found out that there was just a tremendous problem with Native American communities, both on and off reservation, getting capital, having access to credit. And part of it is an institutional systematic problem we have with the reservation system. But I basically said, we're a CDFI. We need to run to the places that need us the most. And so at that point, I went to my board and I said, I know we did this one thing and it was out of our service area, but I think we need to, be bold and stand up and say that we're going to take on this challenge. And that's kind of what's happened. I'm proud to say now we've deployed, I believe, over 45 million through direct lending and also through new markets tax credits in Indian country. And I know we're one of the larger lenders in Indian country, and I still feel like we really haven't done enough. That the need is so great, and with so many tribes and so many communities really suffering, and I'm talking about terrible social issues on the reservations. I just feel like as a CDFI, it was just the right thing to do, and it was important for us to do. And it's some of the loans that I'm the most proud of in our portfolio.
And where can folks learn more about Clearinghouse and, say if there's any investors who are interested, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
We have a great website that has a ton of information, including our financials. It is www.ccdfi.com. Again, that's ccdfi.com. And a lot of information there. There's contact numbers. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that is serious about investing or working with us. And also, we're looking for projects to lend, good projects. And so, and our service area is California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and all of Indian country throughout the United States. So if anyone is aware of an unmet credit need that has good community impact, or, often our loans are made to entrepreneurs, people of color, or members of groups that have been disenfranchised.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.